We're super fortunate to be in conversation with Jost Kobusch, elite high-altitude mountaineer, winter mountaineer. Thank you, Jost.
Hi, Oliver. Yeah, nice to be on the show.
Thanks very much. So do you just want to fill us in where you are at the moment?
I'm in Chamonix, right next to the Mont Blanc at the moment. That's where I spent most of my time training. I moved here 3 years ago.
Great. Jost, I mean, the first time I sort of heard about I saw this video on Instagram. You were on your second Everest winter ascent, I think. The video was unbelievable. I had to show it to non-climbing people because it seemed like the tent would disintegrate. Such was, the amount of wind that was there. I couldn't quite believe it. And then I started to look into you. I started to see your story, and I was like, wow, this is incredible things that this guy's doing. So, I guess we start with that. I know you just got back from Alaska and want to hear all about that, but should we start with the winter Everests? Or do you want to start by maybe just saying a bit about yourself, how you started, where you got into climbing, who were the people that first introduced you to it? Or should we go straight in with the Everest?
All right, so maybe we'll go a bit into the beginnings, and then it will naturally lead us to Everest.
Okay, perfect.
Is there something specific that you would like to know about the beginnings?
Well, I think it's just, there's obviously a big gap between, how you arrive at this, kind of really elite level where you're tackling, alpine style Everest winter without solo, without supplementary oxygen. So between the time when you started to this point where you arrived, what happened to get there? I know there was, first ascents and other pieces, but what happened when you were younger? How did this all start, for example?
Yeah, so most people probably just see like what I'm doing now, and they think like somehow maybe he's very talented and gifted, and he must be like born like that, but reality is pretty different. So when I got interested in climbing was actually because I was scared of heights, and as a child or a teenager I always enjoyed doing the things that scared me most. So I never got the silver swimming badge for like the swimming exam in primary school, because you had to jump this 3 meters jump, and I couldn't do it, but it really bothered me. So when in 6th grade, when I was 12, there was the opportunity to join the local climbing club in my school. Yeah, I went for it, and I was scared, but maybe that's also why I enjoyed it so much. It was just this feeling of growing as a human being, building skill in something, and this process. And then, of course, a few years later, I went for the first time for outdoor climbing, and then you talk to these people who actually do mountaineering, and to me, it was just natural evolution. I thought, okay, the next step would be to do some alpine climbing or mountaineering, and then, of course, I want to go to the high mountains at some point. But obviously, at that point, it was very far away. It was just a dream at that point.
So you started presumably in the Alps. This was the first like high altitude things you did.
So the first mountain I ever climbed was Mount Kenya in Africa.
Wow. And how did that come about?
Oh, horrible disaster. So it started like this. Same school where I joined the climbing group, but then years later, I was already 18 by the time, 19 when the trip started. It was a partner school that we had in Kenya, and I applied for an exchange program for a month, but I also realized there's some mountains in Kenya. I mean, Mount Kenya is the Matterhorn of Africa. It's a steep, rocky, it's a beautiful peak. So I did some research and asked some guiding companies, some guides, hey, could you take me? And they said, what's your experience? I'm like, I've never climbed a mountain. And they're like, look, this is not for you. Don't do it. We don't even consider taking you. So I researched how to do it on my own. And I asked some other exchange students if they wanted to join me. Nobody wanted to do it. So I ended up hiring some agency in Nairobi, which was basically just, I was having a porter and a cook, and we were going there, and the porter and the cook, they already had been to the mountain, so they knew where to hike, but they couldn't climb with me to the summit. And the climb to the summit is a 14-pitch rock climb, and it's steep, it's technical, it's a serious thing. And okay, the short story of that is I got super altitude sick. I went up way too fast. I burnt my face because I didn't know that the UV radiation, it would come through clouds. I just didn't think of that. It's more intense. I felt super sick, super weak, and I reached only 5,000 meters on the climb because I got scared with the conditions. It started snowing, and I guess it was a good thing not to continue. I hired a local guide from the hut who took me there for 50 euros. 50 euros was the guiding fee for taking me. I remember that. Yeah, I learned a lot.
Amazing. And then what happened? So then you got the high altitude bug after that.
It was more like I had this realization afterwards. I was just like, actually, I don't need this porter and the cook. I could have just done it by myself, and I would have probably come to a similar, level on the mountain. I think it really helped, like, see the opportunity of being more independent in a way. Like, it just also, I was there alone, so it was so easy to organize everything. I guess what it did was it inspired me later on, maybe to go for my first solo adventures, because I had difficulties again to find the right climbing partner. You have to know, at that time I was on an extremely low budget. I could only afford to go on this trip because it was state sponsored, like by government and the school, and they supported, like, with the cost to have the exchange. But my first mountains I did, like, with only a few euros.
Wait, so this is true to say you've never had a climbing partner then, and you were pretty much since that time you've been solo since?
No, not exactly. The second mountain I climbed, it's the highest mountain of Germany. It's the Zugspitze. It's only a 2000er. But I had a climbing partner with me, and we went up and we did a traverse to the Alpspitze. It's the Jubiläumsridge. So it's like, it's a ridge. It's not a beginner's thing, but maybe you see the theme here. As I said, I always enjoyed doing things that scare me the most. That's also, especially in those beginning years, I think I chose objectives that were probably too big, and I wasn't ready for them, but that made me grow, like, really fast, and I just had to, like, build a skill level incredibly fast, obviously at a high risk at the same time, but I really enjoyed it at that time.
I mean, presumably you now have this very serious technical proficiency, but how are you learning this on the go then? If you were mostly, by yourself, or was this things that you learned, in the wall, or or you literally, the whole thing is self-taught?
So I had sports climbing experience, so I knew how to handle a rope, how to rappel, all these rope techniques, and, like, most of that I knew, or I would read a book and look at new knots, or watch a YouTube video of how to use the ice axe. So a lot of that stuff in the beginning was a mix between self-teaching, but also I visited 2 classes of the German Alpine Club, where I learned, like, crevasse rescue and like alpine climbing in a way of setting up belays and so on. But apart from that, I learned everything by myself or with a few mentors, people who had experience, or guides where I, like, looked at their technique, asked them a few things, and then adapted it.
Amazing. And so then what happened? You had your first big expedition was to Nepal for Amadablum, or there was something before that?
So maybe to, like, show you how steep the learning curve was, the third mountain I ever did, was Mont Blanc, and it was in off season, end of November, and I was soloing. So I mean, I definitely wasn't ready for that one, but I reached the summit, and it felt in a way like, yeah, I don't know, it felt good. It was showing me that I could do something. So the mountain after that I planned was a 7,000er in Kyrgyzstan, and I went there in off season again. I think also from the beginning, I really enjoyed this interaction with wilderness, being there by myself, like, and having this deep connection. And
That Peak
on Peak
Lenin.
Lenin,
That was Peak
yeah,
Lenin.
that was Peak
Amazing.
Lenin, 7,134 meters, and I went in the late October, which is off season, so I was completely on my own on that mountain.
Literally no one else.
There was no one else, and it's pretty remote, but it seemed to be a great adventure. And also, it was very cheap. I remember, I think the whole expedition cost me something like 450 euros, like for
Wow.
everything. Like, I think including the flight there.
I mean, as someone who organizes trips for people, I mean, just so what, you flew into Bishkek, and then what, you made your own way there, or there was some, someone delivered you to the base camp, or you literally just, you thumbed a lift, you caught a bus? How did this? I mean, it's incredible that you did the climb by yourself, but you just arrived at base camp. There were no base camp services, and you just off you went.
So I went to Osh, which is closer to the mountain, and in Osh I did some couch surfing. So doesn't cost anything. And I went to a few local agencies in Osh, sat down with them, negotiated the price, very old-fashioned way. I'm good at negotiations. You must have guessed that, since I'm going low budget. Now from there, somebody was driving me to the base camp, and that's it. And then I had all my supplies bought in Osh, in like a supermarket, which were like these Chinese noodles and porridge portions. So it's super cheap, but it's very long lasting. It just needs water. It's like dry freeze meals, but low budget version. And that's it. And that's everything you need for the expedition.
Amazing. And so what? And so you didn't summit there for bad weather.
No, I think a major thing was probably my lack of experience.
Okay.
I mean, look, I've never climbed a 6,000-meter peak, and I'm trying a 7,000 on my own there. And I mean, I had to figure out a lot of things there, like gear-wise. It was very experimental. I used like neoprene socks instead of vapor barriers, and was experimenting with that. I brought skis. It was really a big learning. I did few major errors there, and like I could climb my first 6,000, which was Peak Ras Del Naya, which is the one on the shoulder before like going to the summit of Lenin. But I called it off from there. It was just like I felt like I had enough. I put myself through enough until there.
Then you come down, and you've got to agree with someone to come and get you, or there's someone waiting for you. I mean, I'm just thinking for like your safety, or I think because as like trip organizers, we're always thinking like, what happens in the worst case, who's going to come and who's going to be able to help you, or it was literally no one.
I mean, there is a specific spot where you have cell coverage close to the base camp, and I had one of these old Nokia phones which like lasts forever. So I just knew, I went to the spot where I knew the coverage was, and I sent a message to the operator, and then I just camped and waited for them to pick me up.
Amazing.
And the funny thing is, I mean, now we are like in November, and the base camp, you have to cross a few rivers and stuff. And so when I finally saw what picked me up, I was surprised. I thought they sent a Jeep again, but the Jeep for some reason was not available. They sent a bus like for 14, 15 people or something, and the bus got stuck in the frozen river. So we had to like get it out, and like they just brought one extra guy with a shovel because they just knew it probably get stuck. But I mean, that's true adventure, and I think that's what I loved about it, especially in the beginning, was just this exploring, being connected to nature, but also all this uncertainty because I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah, no, that really is a proper adventure. That's incredible. And so, I mean, it's clear that you were on this path for the soloism. Then there was never an idea that you would join a group or or become the partner of another elite alpinist. You always like had it in your mind that these were solo expeditions, and then the winter thing that became your thing.
So I think in the beginning, I wanted to join people. I wanted to have a partner, and I climbed also with partners. So there were other climbs like ice climbs and sports climbs and so on. Just for the mountains, I found it very challenging to find the right partner, especially as I was on a very low budget. That was an issue definitely, but also then you need to find a person in general that would be a good match for you, like personality wise, also wants to climb the same mountain, um, likes a similar approach. So it was challenging. And once I've done a few solos, like for example, the Mont Blanc, I did the Mont Blanc hitchhiking from my parents' place in northern Germany. I think I spent something like 20 euros or 25 euros on the whole trip. I I prepared some sandwiches at home even, and then just hitchhiked down to Chamonix and climbed the mountain. And I mean, it was off season, but it was a bit more like a coincidence. I didn't plan on this, but then I started to enjoy this. I felt so in control of everything, and I could just take decisions like in a split second, and there wouldn't be any regrets of like maybe turning around or going to the summit, or I would it was just felt it was such a powerful experience in a way.
No,
And so I started to like it.
I think the freedom you get, not that I'm doing the expeditions that you're doing, but just, when you're trying to do it with somebody else and trying to align your interests, your goals, find people that want to do the same things in the same style, you can be looking for a while. So it's true when you're just like, I'm doing it by myself, you're just off. There is this kind of freedom. So then let's talk about Everest, because this is an extraordinary story that you're doing winter solo alpine style without supplementary oxygen, but also on a new route. So tell us about you've had two winter expeditions there now, and how did the two compare? I think the second one you gained a lot more visibility, at least to me at least. And how did the two expeditions compare? What went well, what didn't go well? When's the third iteration going to come about? And what do you hope to get next time? Obviously to the summit probably, or how important is that to you?
So the first attempt on Everest was in 2019, 2020. And at that point, I knew I wanted to do this project, but it was really more like an idea in my head. And I believed that it was possible, but deep down there was this voice saying, not exactly sure if it's really possible. So I wanted to explore the options, and I have some rough ideas, but it was really a journey into the unknown. I mean, that's the kind of alpinism I love. It's this when you don't have the information, when you're climbing an unclimbed peak or you're doing a first ascent. And in terms of Everest in 2019, I found some old material in my research, like hand-drawn maps and like topos. And there was like the route I'm attempting, it has been climbed in its parts, just the way I climbed the parts. It's never been climbed before. So I'm combining different routes there to something that I find very aesthetic and logical, and also efficient for a solo climber with my logistics, which are very simple. I don't have any Sherpas or cable cars or anything. I mean, on this route, they have built cable cars in the past to transport loads. You're starting off at a massive rock wall that has also some ice and mix sections. It's technical and has certain objective hazards. And so on the first expedition, it was this great uncertainty, and it was the long search for the route, if you want to sum it up.
And so, I mean, just talk about the logistics, or like just in terms of it was all totally self-supported. So you carried your own loads you created a base camp, and you were going back and forth from Labuche or from Gorakshep or
On the first expedition, I actually had a proper base camp in Everest Base Camp, which is tent based. So it's just I have a small dining tent. There is a small kitchen tent. There is a small toilet tent. There's my private tent where I sleep. A friend of mine joined for the photography, Daniel Hook. He was there for a certain amount of time in another tent. So I was staying in the base camp, but everything that happens beyond the base camp is those are my own logistics. I'm carrying everything. There is no support. I'm very, how do I say, I'm a purist in that sense. I don't want the support because I believe it to be purer, and also the challenge is greater.
no, it's incredible. So you hadn't been during the climbing season. So you these were all like on site routes that you were picking.
You mean on Everest 2019?
Yeah, I mean, had you been like during the climbing season? Had you been, for reconnaissance, or you arrived in the winter and you on you picked the route that you were going to attempt with the aid of the booklets you had or the maps that you'd seen.
So I have been in Everest Base Camp in normal season before, because after my Picolinian climb that we talked about, I went to the Himalayas. I climbed my first Himalayan mountain right after. I climbed Amadablam, which is the
Okay.
Matterhorn of the Himalayas. That was also a solo climb, which I did like at that time I called it free solo. Like I didn't use any ropes or anything because there weren't any. I was the first in the season at that time. Later on, I learned that you can say free solo for alpinism. So I just basically soloed it. And the year after, I came back and I wanted to do an 8,000 meter peak. So I thought about Lhotse. And that's why I spent some time in Everest Base Camp. But then Lhotse in normal season, it was way too crowded for my taste. And I realized you couldn't possibly do a solo there. And yeah, that's how my approach to climbing developed further. Also, it's like a trial and error. You're trying things, you like them, you don't like them, you maybe perform well in certain circumstances. And I did see the route already when I attempted Lhotse in 2015. But it was not a route that anybody would go to, or I was walking towards. I was doing the normal route on Everest. This route that I was attempting on 2019 and that I'm right now still attempting in my Everest project at that time appeared to me just like a wall, just like looking. It was just looking like you don't go there. There is no route.
And so then, and was this the time you did Annapurna then? Or that was the following year?
So after the crowded Lhotse, I thought, okay, maybe there's another way to solo an 8,000er. So I went to the least climbed one, which is Annapurna 1. It's also the most deadly one. I guess that's the reason why it's done so rarely. It had a death toll of something like 33% at the time. It's just an ugly climb. It's just like seracs, ice falls, and like super dangerous, but it's also wild. When you're there, when you're in the base camp, it's remote. Like nobody is just passing by hiking there. It's virtually impossible to go there. The base camp is remote, and yeah, it was a good experience. I climbed Annapurna 1. I did it without oxygen and unsupported. Like I didn't have any help of Sherpas or anything. But after summiting, I also felt like it wasn't a real solo because I summited the same day that the others summited. On the descent, I used the fixed lines. So yeah, I was there alone, but not really. So after that, I was really like, okay, it was bothering me again. I was just like, how can I make this purer, it just didn't feel right, kind of in the sense of soloing.
Sure. So what tell us about the second iteration of the Everest project, the second year. You went back, and this time it seemed like you really were there by yourself.
Yeah, so I mean, I was also on the first attempt, I was really there by myself. It was just that in the base camp, I had two cooks cooking meals and maintaining the base camp. But on the second expedition, I mean, I had learned a lot from the first one. And so I was also experimenting a bit with different solutions. And one of the solutions was not to put up a base camp. Because on the first expedition, in the base camp, I froze my ass off. It was extremely cold. Like, imagine, these base camps, you're sitting at a breakfast table and you're maybe having some toast, but literally anything you want to put on that toast is hard frozen, so you can put nothing on there. It's just like, and it's so cold all the time. I'm sitting in the tent, in my chair, in a summit down suit, like completely zipped up with a hot water bottle, and it's still uncomfortable, and your feet are numb all the time. So I thought, okay, first of all, wouldn't it be like warmer to stay in a proper hut, and also not to worry about all these storms that break tents all the time? And second of all, I thought, look, in the Alps, in the old ages, people, they used tents to climb mountains, but then they built huts later on. And I thought, I mean, I guess you could also kind of take this evolution and put it on like the Himalayas and start from a hut instead of from a tent. And so I thought, okay, just walk a bit extra in the beginning, but you have the hut. You need less resources, which means also less pollution, less interference with nature that you create. You don't bring 1,000 kilograms up to a base camp. You just go there, you stay with locals, you eat their food, and it's a different style. So this time in the base camp, there was only one tent with some gear, and that nothing else, and also nobody else.
And so you would go back and forth from Gorakshep when you wanted to climb.
So I didn't go to Gorakshep. You might remember that it also had a different name sometimes, Goraksh. It's not so clean in my opinion there. So I was afraid that if I would stay there long term, I might get digestive issues with the hygienic circumstances. So I chose to stay in the research center, in the pyramid, which is halfway in between Lobuche and Gorakshep.
Okay. And that worked well. And so that's what you're going to do that next time for the third edition of this project. You'll do the same thing.
I'll do the same thing. It adds some more walking, a few kilometers. I don't know, maybe 8 kilometers extra or something to reach the base camp, and then from there to the wall. But yeah, I think it's a good choice. So it's a good base camp.
And so that where did you make the first camp then? What altitude? How many camps are you having on this ascent? Is just 2, or so you now start at the research center, and then you go to, at which point do you break?
So I would push to a camp that's approximately 5,000, maybe 5,700 or 5,600, which is halfway up the wall towards Lola, which is a pass to Tibet.
Okay, amazing. And then above that, there's 1 or 2 more camps for you.
You mean 1 or 2 more camps to the summit?
Yeah.
There are actually a few more camps because the route is pretty technical. So in an ideal scenario, from there, I would push to something like 6,450 meters. And then from there, I would push to something like 7,000, 7,100. And from there, I would push over a very long ridge towards 7,500. And from there, I would go for a camp to 8,000 at the beginning of the Hornbein Couloir. And from there, I would then begin the technical summit push through the couloir, which also poses some rock climbing difficulty. So all in all, it's a very technical climb, and you're there in winter. So if you're like thinking about these modern developments of like Kilian Jornet summiting this mountain with a speed record and so on, that's not how you think in winter. In winter, you think more defensive, slower, heavier. Storms can appear. Wind speeds of up to like 250 kilometers per hour can appear on the summit. If you're on the mountain at the wrong time in the wrong circumstances, it's deadly. So it's going a bit slower. You have heavier gear to protect yourself from the extreme weather up there.
No, I can imagine. No, it's an incredible challenge. So when does the third iteration start, and what's your plan this time? You head there at what time of year? It's kind of beginning of December, and you plan to be there for 2.5 months, and you're just waiting and seeing how conditions unfurl.
So I will have an acclimatization period by the end of the year in the autumn, and also in the beginning of the winter in Nepal. During that acclimatization period, I will hopefully climb 2 7,000ers, and then also climb a 6,000er close to Everest. Few people will join this time, so it's going to be more like a little academy where I share some knowledge about mountaineering, becoming more independent rather than relying on support of high altitude workers, making your own decisions up there. And then I will jump right into my own expedition right after. So I combine these two things, and use that for acclimatization. And my expedition will start in the calendar winter at the 23rd of December, and it will end with the meteorological winter at the 28th of February. Climbing within those 2 dates will ensure that I'm in both winters, and also to me, that's like true winter. Everything else, 1st of December or 22nd of March, which could be winter according to another definition, are not really winter dates to me.
And can you tell us, like, I mean, we can talk about Denali now, but I mean, the temperatures that you've experienced, I mean, I heard -70 mentioned on Denali. I mean, presumably on the Everest winter, you had like ferocious temperatures. What does it feel like to be at, I might have experienced -15, maybe that was cold, but I can't imagine how it progresses, -20, -25, and you get to how have you managed to be at these temperatures? How do they all compare with each other? -25 sounds cold to me. Then you get beyond that, it's
yeah, I guess let me try to get you to -40. -40 are a bit like you're in some contaminated, poisonous environment, and if you happen to touch any of that environment without protection, like a glove, then you feel pain immediately. It's a tough place to be in. It can be mentally fatiguing, but at the same time, everything you do has to be taken in consideration of the temperature, especially transition periods. You changing things that you do will require you changing your gear or clothing. Or, for example, when you get out of your sleeping bag in the morning and you transition into a different set of clothing and boots, those are the moments where you're most vulnerable and where you can easily get frostbite if you do things wrong. And -40 on the Denali expedition is more like a standard temperature. It's like -30 to -40 like all the time. And it's not like you're in the base camp and nice, it's super warm like in Himalayas. No, it's dark, it's cold, and because it's so cold, all the cold air sinks down, and it sinks down also to the base camp. That's why you have quite similar temperatures on the lower parts and the higher parts as well.
And so how was Denali? It looked incredible. How does it compare with the, how does that mountain environment compare with the Himalayas? How was the expedition in comparison to the other challenges that you've had?
Different, definitely different. Just this very cold environment and also very dark environment. I think this combination especially requires you to use completely different gear. If you would use down insulation, for example, there, moisture from your sweat would go and would be in the insulation in the down, and then it would condensate there, it would freeze there, and it would build up, and then the down could collapse, and you'd lose the insulation. So, I mean, this is just one thing you have to think about. So I'm using different types of insulation, but then the same thing could happen in your sleeping bag. So you're sleeping in only one layer of long underwear in a sleeping bag. And then, oh, sorry, did I say in a sleeping bag? In a plastic bag. And then you have a sleeping bag over that plastic bag and another sleeping bag over that sleeping bag, which means also you are like sweating in that plastic bag and you are always completely wet at night. It's very uncomfortable, but it's the only way to protect your sleeping bag from getting the moisture from your sweat. And so these things, they just take a certain physical toll. You don't rest as well, and then when you're out there, it's just much colder, so you use more energy, and it can get very stormy. It's just like sometimes you have to build a snow cave, and being in a snow cave is very comfortable. In these extreme temperatures, a snow cave is very warm, but I mean, it's just a very different challenge from climbing in Himalayas. And also it's very remote. They're like in 100-kilometer radius, there is nobody, and people can't rescue you there. They don't even have like rescue helicopters stationed there in winter. They can fly in with planes to certain locations, but only very low on the mountain, and you're pretty much on your own. So yeah, it's true wilderness. So in that sense, it was a great experience.
So from the period that you said goodbye to where you were dropped to when you were collected, I mean, how many days were you on your own?
It was 22 days, and during those 22 days, I didn't see any living thing, not even a bird.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you really were out there on your own. I mean, I wouldn't say that that's more remote than Everest. I don't know if that's such, or in winter that's such a thing, but it sounded incredible. It looked beautiful in the photos you took. I mean, how was that trying to, obviously you want to build awareness around what you're doing. You've got your sponsors. How easy is it to get footage of what you're doing in such difficult conditions? I mean, like, I find just on, normal ascents, taking your gloves off, getting the camera out, trying to document things is tough. So this must be like times 100 in these kind of conditions.
I guess it's just really planning that before in advance. And also it comes from the drive to share these moments connected to wilderness and experiencing these things that people usually don't get to experience.
But I mean, there must be moments when you're like, gosh, this would be an incredible photo right now, but I just can't take the gloves off. It's too cold or it's too windy, or is that just another part of it? You're like, okay, this is the time that I'm going to do this, or how does it work?
I guess it's really, sometimes you have these moments, you're like, yeah, it would be nice to take a picture, but for X, Y, Z, it's not possible. And then it's not possible, and then it's okay. And then I just really try to enjoy the moment and see it through my eyes rather than through a camera perspective, which are the most beautiful moments. And there are other moments where, yeah, it's possible, and then I capture the moment.
Amazing. Can you just talk us through the famous video that people might have seen on Instagram where the tent is almost disintegrating? And you're kind of filming this. It's the most incredible wind. It feels like that you can get the sense that the tent might disintegrate. How did that feel at the time? You're kind of talking to the camera. You're kind of saying, well, it might disintegrate. How did that, how did that feel?
Ooh, that was a horrible moment. I think I've never pushed a tent so far. That was really on the verge of flying away with the tent, and um, that's actually a way to die. So, I mean, I was scared, and the tent ripped apart. The poles broke, pierced the tent fabric. I crawled out just with my head out of the fabric to pull out the poles to reduce the surface of attack for the wind. And just doing that felt like holding my head out of a window on the German Autobahn, like just in immense wind speeds, fine snow and ice particles piercing my face like needles. Very uncomfortable, but necessary to survive. And then after I had pulled out the tent poles, or what was left of them, I just wrapped myself in the remaining tent sheet and spent the rest of the night there. I mean, I didn't sleep that night for good reasons, and this fear also kept me alive because it kept me focused on moving the fabric in a way to like increase chances that everything's going to hold up.
Incredible.
Yeah. Oof. I mean, these moments, I guess they're part of these expeditions. You learn, huh?
What is your main motivation? Is it to be the first, or is being anything in particular not that important to you? It's just something, a feeling that you're looking for, or a new experience, or to see how far you can take it. Would you do it if no one knew about it? How do you feel about these things in yourself?
My main driver is my curiosity. I'm curious about what I can achieve as a human being, as an athlete, but I'm also curious about these places. I like traveling, I like seeing the world, and I like visiting places that are wilderness that preferably nobody's been to before. Just because there is such a deep connection with nature there. It's so untouched and virgin, and I really enjoy that. And if I have a bad day, for example, on Everest, and I'm exhausted, dehydrated, and it's just my body doesn't really want to do something, and I feel like, okay, but I need to motivate myself, then another thing that I do is just, thinking about why am I doing this? Thinking about the curiosity and activating it again. It's just like, but what's behind that corner out there? I haven't seen that before. I don't know how it looks like. And it's just like, yeah, I want to go there and have a look, So, and then just like the energy returns.
I mean, there are times that, obviously there must be different emotions that you're feeling, but do you experience fear, or is it's not like that? You have in your mind a kind of like a risk metric that you're like, well, I can take it to this point, and if it gets to this point, then I'll descend, or are these constant checks and balances that you're doing within yourself? Does it ever get to the point where you think, gosh, I'm now beyond that? I need to bring it down a level, or how do you manage that part?
So in general, I believe that fear is a driver for performance. A certain amount of fear is certainly very good. It keeps you super focused and can be used and harnessed as a tool. But the place of fear for me is fear as a servant. It's just like, for example, I'm climbing 35 hours nonstop. I'm descending some tricky ice climb. I haven't slept for a long time. I'm exhausted. If I wasn't afraid, I wouldn't be able to focus, and I wouldn't be able to place my ice tools precisely and make it through it. So it can also happen that maybe in that moment I feel fatigued, and then I'm actively activating the fear by imagining what could go wrong, just to keep me alert, to like give me an energy boost. But obviously there are also moments where I look at an objective and I just feel this big amount of fear, and that's just basically showing me my limits and preventing me from
doing something stupid.
And in terms of, preparation for this, I mean, obviously you're obviously, these challenges require you to be incredibly physically fit. But have you received any coaching for the mental side, or is there like a way that is it just been an accumulation of experiences that's allowed you to get this? Or, David Gottler talked about having this, a coach that was helping with him prepare, mentally. I mean, have you done anything on that side, or is it's just an accumulation of your own experience that's allowed you to push a bit further each time and each time and each time?
I have done some coaching. I wouldn't say it was real performance coaching, but it was like a mental coaching. Generally speaking, maybe also to help me figure out a good base, something like, why am I doing this? It's not just for athletes. I believe this is an important question we all should ask ourselves. And then based on like that, I have chosen a few tools, and mostly that I have like developed over the years, implemented. Sometimes I hear a great tool on the podcast, and then I'm just like, okay, next training session, I'm going to try this and see like if this works for me. And sometimes it just fits and it feels like, yeah, this is something I can use. Like, for example, this, what's the smallest step I can take towards my goal? It's just something I'd listen on a podcast, and then I tried it on expedition and it worked really well. And other things that might be coming from very sophisticated coaches, for some reason they don't stick. And a mental tool only works when you are like able to activate it, when you use it and when you want to use it. So in a way, it's like a patchwork of experiments, try and error, and also implementing those as a way of a routine in the training. So when I'm climbing in the Alps, I try to regularly use all these tools like a piece of gear that you want to grow familiar with, so that when you're on the big project, it just feels familiar, you know how to use it, and it works.
Yeah, that makes sense. And have you got a training plan, or have you got a coach for the more physical side, or is it something that is it more ad hoc? You have a certain like goal for a month or a week, or a daily thing, or is it more structured?
I do have a coach here in Chamonix, and I do have a structured training, but then again, alpinism, mountaineering, all that is really depending on weather. So imagine it more like modules. So I have certain modules with certain activity types and certain intensities that I measure in heart rate. And so I have, for example, upper body modules. And let's say today it was raining here. So if I would have had an upper body module today, with that rain here, sports climbing would not have been an option, probably too wet on the routes. For ice climbing right now, it's too warm. So I would have probably chosen a dry tooling session in an overhanging area that's not affected by the rain. And then, of course, I have endurance sessions, strength training, stretching. So all these modules, they are in my calendar, and they allow for a certain flexibility, but at the same time, I'm getting like a planned output.
And how long have you been in Chamonix now, and how do you find being in Chamonix? Describe it, a typical day or week of your life in Chamonix?
So, I mean, let's say it goes in cycles. So a typical week can look very different. Right now, I'm back from Alaska. I'm exhausted. This expedition, even though it felt very successful and I felt like everything was executed very well, and I never once asked myself, why am I doing this? Or I thought I was completely destroyed. I feel this deep fatigue from the extreme temperatures, from the loss of body weight also, and resources. So right now I'm chilling. Like yesterday I climbed 2 mountains with my girlfriend, but very relaxed. On the second mountain I took a flight down, but on other days maybe we like I take a walk or I go cycling or I go for an easy rock climb. It's not so structured right now because I'm in a recovery phase and I just really closely listen to my body and I try not to overdo it. But now if we look to, let's say, a typical week this summer, the coming summer, it might contain 40 hours of net training, multiple 4,000ers, mixed climbing, but maybe also some other stuff. And it's going to be very intense. And I'll probably feel as I would feel right now. I feel just lightly fatigued, but I'm just much stronger. So it goes in these cycles, and it's usually after an expedition where I'm destroyed and I have to like listen to my body and take it slow. But also in a heavy training cycle, it can happen that you catch the flu or a cold or something, and then it's important to chill a bit. And that's harder than it sounds like, because like I want to climb all this stuff, I want to go there, I want to do this, like I want to see new places. I want to climb new mountains, new routes, all that stuff. And sometimes it's hard to like not to do it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that is, I find this is the hardest, is that when you get momentum also, is that you don't want to stop, or it's harder to listen to your body. It's harder to take the breaks. Out of interest, how much weight did you lose in Alaska, and what did you allow for this? Did you put on weight before you go, or what did you have a strategy around nutrition and your weight, or was this something you were expecting, or how drastic was it?
So I lost something like 10% of body weight, which for my standards is, I think, the most that I have lost so far. I put on some weight before I left, and that worked actually. That was pretty good. Usually I struggle to put on weight also with all the exercise and everything. So that I calculated for. And then nutrition wise, I didn't do this traditional calorie calculation. I just took more food than necessary. And I just tried to eat as much as possible. Like if I would feel like I have 2 dinners tonight, I just eat the double portion, or I would allow for snacks and stuff in between and just try to load as much as possible, because here's the challenge. It's extremely cold. Your body needs more fuel, just also with heat loss and everything. But at the same time, I'm moving into a high altitude environment where my digestion doesn't work as effectively because it takes a lot of oxygen. So I also have a loss of appetite, and also I can't simply digest so much. And I also can't take food or fuel sources that are high fat, because this fat will be very, very difficult to digest in the altitude. So it's a fine balance. And then, of course, I made sure that still like 22 days without fresh food can also be challenging nutrition-wise. So I took a supplement, Athletic Greens. It's a powder. It's sealed in small bags, so it doesn't need to be refrigerated. Actually, it would have been refrigerated anyway. Learning here, maybe I can use a different package next time. Anyway, this thing contains like whole food source ingredients, so it just has like these real food ingredients from like plants and stuff. So I would use that also to supplement with some like plant-based, like freshly ingredients that I would use daily for vitamins and minerals and stuff. And then I would also use omega-3 like oil. So I would contain, like I would just what I normally would do for nutrition, I would try to do as much as possible also within the project. Just because it's so long, I just, couldn't imagine, just going on dry freeze for like 3 weeks.
And can you tell us, so when you got to the summit of Denali, how did that feel? How important was it to you to summit? I get the feeling that there's just kind of a bigger, sense of feelings that you're having. That's not just, a selfie on a summit, that there's, something larger at play. But when you got to the summit, presumably you did feel this kind of elation. How long were you there for? Or was it, did you feel like, okay, now I've really got to get down? Or how long were you there?
think I was there maybe 5 minutes total. You have to imagine it like as a dark summit, like it's completely pitch dark. It's probably around -40 Celsius, but unfortunately 55 kilometers of constant strong wind, sometimes a bit stronger. So I'm struggling to stay on my feet. So I'm on the summit on my knees so that I'm not blown over. And I'm sending this GPS satellite message with my GPS coordinates as a proof that I reached the summit, because I mean, a picture, you couldn't tell if I was on the summit.
Yeah.
It's so cold that after just 2 minutes of not using my mittens and typing on the device, my hand goes numb and my whole body feels like wood. And the wind is so strong that I'm realizing that I'm losing feeling in my feet. My whole body stiffens up, and it's just like as soon as I send the message, the device went straight back into a warmer layer. I closed everything up. I picked up the camera that I just sticked into the ground during typing, and I was sprinting down the mountain. So it was just as short as possible up there. Mentally, obviously, the summit is an important point. You can easily mistake the summit for the goal. That's why it's so tricky. But if you look at it very rationally, the summit is only halfway. The goal is to be back down in the base camp. And so being aware of that, I was really starting to sprint down, begin a long descent. And yeah, it felt good that I'd been on the summit, but I mean, I was totally aware that it was just halfway.
And so is there a point where you start to relax, or it's not until you're actually back, with another person leaving this arena that you actually start to relax and take it all in and start to process what's happened?
I mean, walking downhill is easier. Gravity helps. So from that moment on, I could increase my speed, which means I will feel warmer because I can move faster. And also I use up less oxygen because my heart rate will relax walking downhill. But at the same time, I'm at a mountain that I have never been on before. It's the first time that I've visited Denali. And so now I'm also making a decision not to descend on the route that I ascended on, because the Messner Couloir, which I climbed, was too icy for my taste, and a storm broke out that wasn't forecasted. So I don't want to climb backwards down on hard blue ice. So I'm choosing to descend on the normal route, which I've never been onto, and it's dark, and I'm just following my GPS. So it's not over yet.
Yeah, no, it's extraordinary. So tell us what, there's obviously the final chapter of, well, maybe not the final, but there's the next chapter of the Everest project. What else is on your radar? I mean, is South America somewhere you're heading? Is it more 8,000ers? Is there a sort of, what's the bigger picture? Is there a sort of 8,000-meter winter objective? You're going to try and have the 14 winter summits, or where can you take it from here? I mean, it seems that you're so young. Bearing in mind with what you've done so far, is where can you take this? What are the bigger objectives that you'll look to in the future?
I feel a bit like when I was younger, I was so focused on like what's the next project, what am I going to do next, and so on, so that I was already thinking so much while I was on a project. I was already thinking so much about what's the next big thing. That right now, I just want to climb. I just want to see a lot of mountains, climb some new lines and stuff, and focus on the Everest project. Yeah, spend my energy there, see how I can do it better. There are some things that I'd like to do in the Arctic, but it's just like, I think this Everest project right now is the center of what I'm doing, like mentally, like in a way, it provides so much direction to what I'm doing. So I don't want to spend too much time thinking about other things. I think with time, there will be new projects, big projects coming, but I don't want to make the mistake of taking too much of my focus and energy away from what's right in front of me.
And tell us, I mean, how do you find the interest is growing? You've got Black Yak. Do you have other sponsors, or how have you found funding these expeditions? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of noise in mountaineering at the moment. There are people with big profiles, but they're not necessarily doing the same things that you're doing. Do you find that part of it easy, hard? Are you getting new sponsors?
All right.
Sorry, we're back.
Okay, yeah. So I don't want to spend too much time focusing on things in the future, because I believe right now I really want to focus on what's right in front of me.
Sure. No, amazing. It's an amazing project. So we wish you all the best for this Winter Everest. It's quite extraordinary. When I first saw you doing it, I was really blown away. I couldn't quite believe it. So we wish you all the best with that. I'm sure that you will do it. I think you're right I mean, that must occupy a huge amount of headspace. I was going to ask you about your relationship with Black Yak, and how that came about, how easy it is to find sponsorship for these projects. How do you find the big brands? Are they enthusiastic for this project? I see a lot of big brands that they're moving away almost from having the athlete programs. Eddie Bauer just closed theirs. So is that an issue? Is it something that you think about, or what are your thoughts on the big sponsorship deals and who they seem to go to?
So Black Yak is one of my sponsors. We develop gear together. So the early philosophy was always like I could go there and maybe I have special requests for my projects, which are very like unique. Like we talked about Denali having an insulation that's non-down, so that the down couldn't collapse. So for Denali, we developed prototypes in insulation. So I had 3 different onesie suits that I was wearing. So it's just great that I have the opportunity to develop all this gear. And on Everest as well, I'm using a down suit that I have developed with Black Yak together and also with another athlete. So that's great. And actually, I think I'm pretty lucky with Black Yak because, I mean, I can pretty much do my own thing. They don't push me to do anything. Sometimes it's more like, for example, I'm suggesting the Everest Winter Project, and they're like, wait a minute, I think we think that's too crazy. We think it's too dangerous. Like, are you sure about this? So in a way, it's great to have sponsors like that care and where you have a personal connection. And I do believe if you as an athlete are putting out projects that are inspiring, however they may look like, that you can get a sponsorship today. But I also do see that more and more influencers are coming along where you can't really define if they are like performing in a way an athlete performs, but they might generate a certain content or another value to brands. I do believe that athletes are not dying out. It's just that it's getting more and more difficult to figure out who is an athlete and who is an influencer and what's the difference, and aren't athletes also influencers, and what's the whole thing. And like, so brands are also struggling to identify like how to deal with this change and all of that. And yeah, I guess it can be tricky, but I'm probably very fortunate that for me, I don't have to think about that, and I have strong partners, strong sponsors that I work with, and that help me to live my dreams.
Thanks very much, Jost. Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
And are you doing any other work? Are I read that you're writing. Are you doing guiding? What are you, other than your, as a professional climber and your activities, do you do anything else?
I sell books. I mean, my own books. I do motivational speakings or just speakings, like talking about my climbs and expeditions. And I do a little bit of guiding in Nepal. And it's a bit more like an academy. So it's like either I'm taking people for unclimbed peaks. So for example, I had a client last season that really wanted to climb an unclimbed 6,000er. So we selected one that was according to his level. And then it was more like a one-to-one thing where I took him and we climbed this peak together. Or it's small groups where you basically teach the basics of high altitude mountaineering.
Yes, we won't keep you any longer. We appreciate your time. You said some really insightful, really interesting things, and they are inspiring, the expeditions that you're doing. So we hope you continue to do them. We hope that you continue to document them in the way that you do, because I know that it is hard to when you're at these temperatures, at these altitudes, to take the gloves off to get the footage. But people do enjoy seeing them. It is extraordinary. So keep doing what you're doing, and we look forward to seeing where you can take it and what happens in round 3 on Everest.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me on the show, Oliver.
My pleasure.